Henry Every, the notorious 17th century pirate famed for his cunning and success in maritime exploits. Born in England 1659, he became a pirate by 1694, leading a mutiny on the Spanish slave ship Charles II, subsequently renaming it to the Fancy. But his most infamous act was the 1695 capture of the Ganj-i-Sawai, a Mughal ship laden with treasure, making him one of the wealthiest pirates in history, and of course straining relations between England and the Mughal Empire. Now, despite a global manhunt, Every continued to evade capture, and his ultimate fate to this very day remains a mystery, cementing his legacy as the King of Pirates. Welcome to the channel, everyone, and it's nice to meet any newcomers. To those returning, good to have you again. Do you like pirates? Do you have an interesting fact about pirates? How about you leave it in the comments, and I will pin the most interesting one. Who knows? It could be you. Now, without any further ado, let's get on with the video today. The biography of the King of Pirates, Henry Every. Henry Every's birth is believed to have taken place on the 20th of August, 1659, in the settlement of Newton Ferrers, located approximately 6 miles southeast of Plymouth in England. According to the parish records that have been lovingly preserved, lucky for us, he was identified as the child of one John Avery and his wife Anne, whose maiden name is unfortunately unknown. But what about the Every family? Were they always pirates? Of course not. Well, the Every family of Devon were already quite well established, and they were certainly not poor by anyone's estimation. It's probable that he was a relative of the Every family residing in Wycroft Castle, and if you're residing in a castle back in those days, you're doing pretty well for yourself, unless you're residing in there because you're hiding from a sieging army. Then you're not doing very well. Now, based on the declaration of William Phillips, who was a crew member on Every's ship, who provided a voluntary confession following his capture, it is stated that Every was approximately 40 years old in August of 1696. Additionally, it's mentioned that Every's mother resided close to Plymouth, while his wife was involved in selling periwig and lived in Ratcliffe Highway. Either way, Every was married to one Dorothy Arthur at St. James Duke's Palace in London on the 11th of September 1690, according to documents. But unfortunately, we don't have any evidence that suggests that they had any children. This doesn't mean that they didn't have any. It just simply means that we don't have any written accounts of it. Now, the earliest biographical record of the individual, titled The Life and Adventures of Captain John Avery, which was released in 1709 in London, indicates that he was born in 1653 at Catdown, Plymouth. Well, despite the current knowledge that we have already mentioned and the incorrectness of this place and date, they have been commonly referred to in prior works. There is another proposed year as well for Every's birth, which is 1665, but this is also incorrect. Well, the author of the memoir, who was actually from the Netherlands, penned his narrative about 10 years after Henry Every disappeared. He goes by the name of Adrian van Broek, but it seems likely that this was a made-up name. The tale recounts Van Broek's brief period of being held as a prisoner by Every's crew on board the ship Fancy. It also asserts that Every's father was a merchant captain who had previously served in the Royal Navy under the command of Admiral Robert Blake. Various subsequent narratives of Every's life, notably Daniel Defoe's King of Pirates in 1720, have also mentioned the earlier publication and used it as a reference. However, as of 2024, its accuracy is doubtful. And, further to that, the Dictionary of National Biography has labeled it as a fiction with very little basis in reality. That's a one-star review from them. And here's another one for you. There is a belief that Every's birth name was not Henry Every at all, but actually Benjamin Bridgman. That is supported somewhat loosely by his nickname, Long Ben. Don't know how he got that nickname. Contemporary scholarship has, however, disproven this claim. In fact, historians widely acknowledge that Henry Every was indeed the pirate's authentic name, as evidenced by the use of his name throughout his time in the Royal Navy. Now, since this occurred before he started his pirate activities, he didn't really require a false identity. He adopted the moniker Bridgman only after engaging in piracy. It is possible that Every was related to the famous Every baronets, although, well, once again, it's simply a possibility. We don't really have any definitive evidence to support the claim, at least not yet. It is likely that Every had a career as a sailor, though, from a very young age, serving on many ships in the Royal Navy. According to popular tales, Every was a member of the English fleet that attacked Algiers, that is, in Algeria, of course, in 1761, engaged in piracy on the Caribbean Sea, and even commanded a logwood freighter. However, it is important, rather, to note that these events are derived from Van Broek's narrative, and we can't take them too seriously. Well, the documented evidence, however, does begin in March of 1689, which is just after the start of the 9 Years' War. Now, amid this conflict, England and its allies, which included Bavaria, the Dutch Republic, the Palatinate, Saxony, Spain, were engaged in a war against Louis XV of France. You see, their goal was to limit French expansion. In this context, Every, who was in his early 30s at the time, served as a midshipman on the HMS Rupert, a powerful warship that boasted an impressive 64 guns. The ship was under the command of Sir Francis Wheeler. Every's Navy record indicates that he prioritized his family and allocated only a small portion of his earnings toward non-essential items like tobacco. He consistently sent the majority of his income back home to support his family. That's very nice of him, isn't it? Now, onto HMS Rupert, which played a pivotal role in seizing a significant French convoy at Brest, France in the middle of 1689. Well, Every's triumph provided him with a chance to improve his financial situation, and by the end of July, he was elevated to the position of master's mate on the HMS Rupert, although he was likely the least experienced among the ship's 3 master's mates. By the end of June 1690, he received an invitation to join Captain Wheeler on a recently built ship called the HMS Albemarle, which was equipped with 90 guns. It is probable that he took part in the Battle of Beachy Head against the French a fortnight later, a conflict that concluded in a devastating manner for the English. Every was subsequently released from the Royal Navy on the 29th of August of that year. But following his release from the Royal Navy in 1691, Every got engaged in the Atlantic slave trade. Not the best career choice, but pretty normal for the time. He was hired by Isaac Ritchie, the royal governor of Bermuda, to carry enslaved Africans from West Africa to the Americas. And during this time, Every mostly worked as a slave trader along the Guinea coast. One English historian, Douglas Botting, describes Avery as a very cunning and deceitful slaver, surpassing many others in the same despicable trade. In 1693, Every's actions along the Guinea coast attracted the attention of other slave traders. Captain Thomas Phillips, a Welsh slave trader, and the captain of the Hannibal, a slave ship working for the Royal African Company, noted in his journal that I have not encountered Africans as cautious as those here on the coast, which leads me to believe they have been deceived and abducted by individuals like Long Ben, also known as Avery. Avery was notorious for employing a deceptive tactic of hoisting friendly flags to entice slave dealers aboard his vessel, only to subsequently capture and confine them in the ship's hold with their enslaved victims. Well, you feel sorry for the slaves, of course. But one can only imagine the looks that the slaves would have been given to the slave masters when they're all locked in the same room together. Just imagine how nervous the quote-unquote master was when he found himself in the same position of those he wanted to dominate. Oh, how the turntables! Well, Phillips, as stated in his own writings, encountered Every multiple times, and maybe even had a personal connection with him. You see, Phillips observed Every's atypical authorization for slave selling from Ritchie, a disliked governor who was subsequently dismissed in 1693 due to misconduct. But nevertheless, historians have observed that there is a scarcity of documentation regarding this particular phase of Every's life. And now, in the same year of 1693, there was a group of investors who were based in London, led by one Sir James Hoblan, a wealthy merchant aiming to revive the stagnant English economy, who established a bold enterprise called the Spanish Expedition Shipping. The expedition comprised of 4 warships, the pink Seventh Son, along with the frigates Dove, with renowned navigator William Dampier serving as second mate, James and Charles II, which is sometimes mistakenly referred to as Duke. Now, the ship Charles II was authorized by Charles II, not of England, don't get confused, of Spain, who the ship was named after, to attack French ships in the West Indies. The venture was authorized by the Spanish under a trading and salvage license. Now, the main objective was to travel to the Spanish West Indies, engage in trade, provide the Spanish with weapons, and retrieve gold from sunken galleons, all while looting the French territories in the region. The investors pledged to remunerate the sailors generously. The contractual agreement specified with a fixed monthly salary to be dispersed biannually, as twice a year, over the duration of that employment, with the initial month's payment provided in advance prior to the commencement of the mission. Hobblon personally embarked on the ships and encountered the crew, providing them with reassurance on their wages. Indeed, all wages up until August the 1st, 1693, which was just before the expedition began, were dispersed on that very date. Now, back to Every. Due to his prior naval experience, especially being a part of the Royal Navy structure, he was elevated to the position of first mate upon joining the Spanish expedition. Admiral Sir Don Arturo O'Byrne, an Irish aristocrat with prior experience in the Spanish Navy, commanded the convoy consisting of 4 ships. But the trip encountered an immediate setback when the flag captain John Strong, an experienced sailor who had previously served under Sir William Phipps, passed away while the ship was still docked. Not so strong after all. Despite being replaced by Captain Charles Gibson, this was not the final occurrence of tragedy for the venture. The 4 warships were ascending the Thames to Corunna in northern Spain in early August of 1693. But unexpectedly, the ships reached Spain 5 months after the 2-week voyage to Corunna. Ships had to wait because Madrid's legal documents had simply not yet arrived. Slow post system. Some things never change. Well, as the documents were delayed, the sailors were trapped in Corunna, unable to send money home to their families, and unable to find other work. Several months passed by in the port, and the men officially requested their captain to pay them their starting wages. If the request was granted, the people could have left the ship easily. Their appeal was, however, rejected, which most of them saw coming anyway. Bit of a long shot, but worth a try. Well, after the men's wives' unsuccessful petition to Hobblon, many sailors became frantic, believing that they had been betrayed and even enslaved by the Spanish. Tricked. Well, the 1st of May, as the fleet finally left Corunna, the men demanded 6 months' worth of wages, or they would immediately go on strike. Now, although Hobblon refused, Admiral O'Byrne saw the gravity of the situation and wrote to England requesting payment for his crew. On the 6th of May, O'Byrne and some sailors argued, which likely led them to plan a mutiny and recruit more sailors. Thus, each man recruited others. According to William Phillips, a sailor on the Dove, Every would actively go between other ships and convince the men to join him, promising to take them to a place where they could make enough money. Every's experience and lower social status made him the best candidate to lead the mutiny, as the crew believed that he would prioritize their well-being, mutual understanding, perhaps even class solidarity. So back to O'Byrne, who planned to spend the night on land on Monday the 7th of May 1694, giving the men their chance. Every and about 25 other men boarded Charles II at 9 p.m. and surprised the crew. Captain Gibson's incapacity ended the revolt without bloodshed. One report states that James's men approached the ship in a longboat and said, "Is the intoxicated boatswain present on the vessel?" before joining the mutiny. Captain Humphreys of the ship of the James informed Every that the crew was abandoning their posts, but Every calmly replied that he was well aware of that. Thus, James shot Charles II, alerting the Spanish night watch. Thus everybody had to flee to the sea and disappeared into the darkness. Well, Every allowed the non-conspirators to disembark after sailing far enough to ensure their safety, and even respectfully suggested that Gibson take command if he supported their cause. Charles Elms, another sailor on the crew, said Every had told Gibson, "If you are interested in joining us, we will accept you, and if you become serious and focus on your duties, there is a possibility that I may promote you to one of my lieutenants. However, if you do not, there is a boat available to transport you to the shore." The captain and the other sailors disembarked after refusing. Only the ship's surgeon was prohibited from leaving, because they had to have a surgeon on board. Career choices. Sometimes you regret them. And of course, with that, Every was unanimously elected by the remaining men the captain of the ship. He was reportedly more impolite, however, with Gibson, but he did offer him the second mate position, which is not bad. Whatever the situation was, Every executed the rebellion with refinement and magnanimity, suggesting he was not just seeking a good excitement or a quick raid for some quick money, but he had some broader ambitions. Well, let's see how it goes from here. Seems that the career of Henry Every is just about to begin. Now, it was very easy for him to convince the men to go on a pirate voyage to the Indian Ocean, because their first assignment resembled piracy, and Every was known for his persuasive skills. He may have referenced Thomas Tew's Red Sea bounty capture a year earlier, but the crew quickly decided to split the treasure, so each member got a single share, but the captain got two. Now the ship was renamed to the Fancy to reflect the crew's renewed optimism, and also its exceptional performance. They then headed for the Cape of Good Hope. Every committed his first act of piracy by stealing supplies from 3 Barbados-based English commercial ships in Miao, Cape Verde's easternmost island in the Sotavento archipelago. 9 crew members from these ships quickly joined Every's crew, bringing their total to 94. He occasionally visited Guinea and tricked a local chieftain into boarding the ship Fancy by pretending to trade. He enslaved the chieftain and his men by seizing their wealth. Every then stopped at Bioko in the Bight of Benin as he traveled down Africa's coast. After this, it was time to make a few adjustments to the ship. By removing part of the superstructure, the ship Fancy became one of the fastest vessels on the Atlantic. Around October 1694, the Fancy seized 2 Danish privateers near Principe, looting their ivory and gold cargo and boarding 17 Danish deserters. In early 1695, the Fancy circumnavigated the Cape of Good Hope and stopped in Madagascar. The crew likely restocked near St. Augustine's Bay during this visit. The ship then stopped at Joanna, Comoros. Every's crew slept and restocked once again. They then plundered a passing French pirate ship and recruited 40 of its crew members to join the company. At this point, Every had about 150 skilled soldiers. Of course, at this time, Every had wrote to English naval commanders in the Indian Ocean, falsely claiming that he had not attacked English ships, even though he most certainly had. His letter describes a signal English skippers could use to signal their presence, allowing him to avoid them. He warns them that if they do not use the signal, his crew may simply just take it as free rein to loot the ships. In fact, the document may have been a ploy by Every to avoid the East India Company, whose powerful ships were the Fancy's only real threat in the Indian Ocean. However, the letter did not deter the English from seeking him out, and with that, they began to follow him. He then travelled to the volcanic island of Perim in 1695 to await an Indian fleet that was expected. The fleet was Asia's and possibly the world's richest treasure fleet, and if the pirates took it, they would have orchestrated the best and richest pirate raid ever. So, of course, they were certainly having the dollar signs turning around in their eyeballs for that one. Now, in August of 1695, Fancy arrived at the Straits of Bab el-Mandeb, where Every joined forces with 5 other pirate captains. 2 on the sloop of war Amity, commanding 60 men, Joseph Farrow on the Portsmouth Adventure leading 60, Richard Want on the Dolphin also with 60, William Mays on Pearl with 30 or 40, and Thomas Wake on Susanna with 70 men at his disposal. Of course, each captain had privateering commissions spanning from the eastern seaboard of North America. Every became admiral of the 6-ship pirate flotilla. Despite Du's likely superior expertise. Either way, he suddenly led over 450 men as they patiently awaited the Indian Navy. A fleet of 25 grand Mughal vessels, including the 1,600-ton Ganj-i-Sawai, with 80 cannons and over 1,000 crew members, and also its larger escort, the 3,200-ton Fateh Muhammad, with 94 cannons and 800 crew members, was seen crossing the straits to Surat. The convoy evaded the pirate fleet overnight, but the pirates pursued it. Fateh Muhammad's fortune of 50 to 60,000 pounds could have bought Fancy 50 times over, but the pirate fleet divided it among themselves, leaving Every's crew with very little. Now the ship Ganj-i-Sawai, under the command of Muhammad Ibrahim, was indeed a formidable adversary. Equipped with 80 cannons and a musket-wielding security force of 400, in addition to 600 other passengers that may take up arms if times were desperate. The Pearl crew, first apprehensive about attacking Ganj-i-Sawai, now gained courage and joined Every's crew on the deck of the Indian ship. and thus an intense hand-to-hand melee therefore took place, lasting for a duration of 2 to 3 hours. According to Muhammad Hashim Kafi Khan, a modern Indian historian in Surat at the time, Ganj-i-Sawai's captain quickly went to the lower decks as Every's crew entered the ship. He gave the enslaved girls weapons and told them to get up on top and fight the pirates. In his extensive book, The History of India, as narrated by its own historians, Kafi Khan blames Captain Ibrahim for the battle's failure. He writes that the Christians were poor sword fighters, and that the royal vessel had many weapons. Well, the weapons didn't do them much good. Kafi Khan claimed that the victorious pirates assaulted and killed their terrified captives on every corner of every deck of the ship, and the pirates even tortured their captives who hid the riches in ship storage to get more information. Some Muslim women took their own lives by jumping overboard to avoid being violated, while others were captured and brought aboard the ship Fancy. Well, according to later accounts, Every found something more delightful than precious stones, I quote, on board. Likely Aurangzeb's daughter or granddaughter. Now, modern East India Company sources say Ganj-i-Sawai was transporting a relative of the emperor, but there is no proof that it was his daughter or her entourage. Contemporary source, rather, not modern. Well, either way, the pirates left the survivors on their ships to return to India. Ganj-i-Sawai, the most prominent Mughal ship, yielded 200 to 600,000 pounds, and this included 500,000 gold and silver coins. Pirates split up the loot among themselves. In the work A General History of the Pirates by Charles Johnson, which is admittedly an unreliable source, it is claimed that Every used his persuasive skills to convince the other captains to trust him with the Mughal loot, and then he escaped under the cover of night. Pearl and Fancy crews traded trimmed coins, according to more reliable accounts. Every's crazed men took Pearl's wealth. Portsmouth Adventure witnessed the battles of the Ganj-i-Sawai, but Faro's crew did not participate and did not gain any of its riches. And each man gave Mays 2,000 pieces of 8, probably an estimate since the treasury they had captured would have been in Indian and Arabian currencies of different values. This was mainly to buy provisions, and after this they parted ways. Now that's the general story from Charles Johnson's work. Now, the looting of Emperor Aurangzeb's treasure ship occurred during a time of turmoil for the East India Company, whose profits were still recovering from the war. You see, the East India Company imported £30,000 in 1695, down from 800,000 in 1684. Every's attack threatened English trade in India, and that is bad for business. Local Indian governor Itimad Khan quickly detained and monitored the English who were in Surat. This was done to protect them from the violent locals and as retribution for their countrymen's harm. An enraged Aurangzeb shut down 4 East India Company factories in India and detained the officers, almost authorizing a military assault on Bombay to permanently expel the English from India. Now, the East India Company promised all monetary compensations to Aurangzeb, while Parliament officially labelled the pirates as hostis humani generis, or the enemy of humanity. In mid-1696, the government authorized a £500 reward for Every's capture, which is equivalent to almost 100,000 US dollars in today's money. Additionally, they promised to pardon anyone who provided his location, a get-out-of-jail-free card. The first documented global manhunt began when the East India Company raised the reward to £1,000, so about the equivalent of 200,000 US dollars in today's money. In March of 1696, the ship Fancy anchored at Royal Island, 80 kilometers northeast of New Providence in the Bahamas. 4 of Every's crew members took a small boat to Nassau, the island's capital. They carried a letter for the governor of the island, Nicholas Trott, and in the letter it said that Fancy had just returned from Africa, and the ship's 113 interlopers needed some time on land. Trott received £860 from the crew for letting Fancy enter the harbour and concealing the men's East India Company commercial monopoly violation. Now, Captain Henry Bridgman, with quotation marks, promised to give the governor the ship after his crew had unloaded the cargo. And that was an offer that certainly piqued Trott's interest. See, 8 years into the 9 Years' War, the island, which the Royal Navy had not visited in a while, was dangerously underpopulated. Trott was aware that the French had recently seized Exuma, which was 140 miles southeast, and were en route to New Providence. Nassau had only 60 or 70 residents, and half of them were on guard duty at any given time, making it impossible to staff all 20 cannons. If the crew of the Fancy had stayed in Nassau, the island would have twice as many men, and if anything was going to happen, they'd certainly be able to put up a decent fight. So the heavily armed ship in the harbour may also deter French attacks simply by being there, while refusing entry to, quote, Bridgman could be disastrous if he became aggressive, as his group of 113 would likely overpower the island's population. Trott called a meeting of the governing council of Nassau, likely arguing that interloping was simply a common offence, and that rejecting the men who were currently securing the city was as unwise as it was unjustified. Thus the council allowed Fancy to use the harbour. Apparently they were also unaware of the illicit payment, that being the bribe that was given to secure the proper conditions. As I say, it always helps grease the wheels. Trott wrote to Every that his crew could come and go, and he then met Every on solid ground in a private meeting. After Fancy was transferred to the governor, he found more bribes in the ship's hold, including 50 tons of ivory tusks, 100 barrels of gunpowder, many chests of rifles and ammunitions, and several ship anchors. Now, there was also a little point of concern. There were a great many coins on the boat, yeah, sure, but they were all foreign minted coins, and they were very numerous. Where'd you get all the foreign minted coins from? Well, Trott could not really overlook this. He likely saw the repaired battle damage on the Fancy and knew that the crew was more than simply unlicensed slavers. After learning that the Royal Navy and the East India Company were searching for the ship Fancy, and that this Captain Bridgeman was actually Every, Trott simply denied knowing anything about the pirate's background other than what they had told him. He insisted that islanders had no reason to doubt their claims. He ignored the pirate's proclamation that Every's crew could be easily identified and exposed due to their large amount of foreign gold and silver coins. Meanwhile, Every's men could frequent town taverns, normal pirate activities. The crew quickly became dissatisfied with the Bahamas because the island had a low population density and, well, there was just nothing to do. You see, they had all of this money and nowhere to spend it. What were they going to spend it on? I don't know. A couple of jars of preserved jam or something. You can't expect too much from a small town of 70 people. So after that, the pirates didn't have much of a choice. They lived on in general monotony for a few months. Well, Trott, he had already taken all of the Fancy's valuables and intentionally crashed it into rocks, possibly on his own orders to destroy a crucial piece of evidence. It is claimed that Trott had to issue a warrant for Every's arrest or reveal his pirate ties after receiving the order to arrest him and his crew. So, to save his reputation, he informed the authorities of the pirate's location. But Every and his crew were warned before the police arrived. The entire crew of 113 fled the island. Only 24 of the men were caught, and 5 of them were executed. But Henry Every was never seen again. His last statements to his subordinates were a series of contradictory narratives about his destination, likely to deceive any pursuers, throw them off the trail. Well, some believe that Every's crew disbanded after failing to buy a pardon from Trott or the Jamaican governor. Some stayed in the West Indies, but most seem to have gone to North America. Every may have returned to England with the survivors. Some of these people boarded the Isaac, while Every and 20 others boarded the Seaflower under Captain Farrow for Ireland in late June of 1796. They raised suspicions while unloading their valuables, and 2 were arrested, but then everybody simply escaped again. Of course, during the decade after Every's disappearance, there was an ongoing search for him. And actually, there were a few people who claimed to see him, but unfortunately none of them were considered trustworthy. Following the release of a fictitious autobiography in 1709, which asserted that Every was a monarch governing a pirate paradise on Madagascar, popular narratives progressively adopted a more mythical and romantic tone. Well, despite the widespread belief among the people, these stories lacked any foundation of fact. They were simply made up. But hey, got to sell books somehow, don't you? Think of how captivating that would be. Some pirate captain out there keeps evading capture, running his own pirate kingdom. You can see how that would be quite an interesting topic for people to buy books about. Well, approximately 75 members of Every's crew embarked on a journey to North America, with the intention of evading the extensive search conducted across the continent. The crew members were observed throughout the Carolinas, New England, and Pennsylvania. Now, some of them went as far as bribing the Pennsylvania Governor William Markham with £100 per person. This was sufficient to procure the governor's loyalty, as he was cognizant of their true nature, and purportedly even sanctioned one of them to wed his daughter, which I couldn't imagine any father vetting someone to marry his daughter, asking what the career they had was, and they said, "Well, I'm a pirate." Well, you've got my blessing. Go ahead. I'll pay for the wedding and everything. Well, once again, bribes. The money does the talking. Well, despite the efforts of other local officials, particularly Magistrate Captain Robert Sneed, to apprehend the pirates, the governor's support ensured that they continued to be bold enough to even openly brag about their actions while getting drunk in all the local taverns. When Sneed's persistent behavior began to annoy the governor, the magistrate was reprimanded. This is the quote from the magistrate. "He, Markham, called me rascal and dared me to issue my warrants against these men, saying that he had a good mind to commit me. I told him that were he not governor, I would not endure such language, and that it was hard to be treated for doing my duty. He then ordered the constables not to serve any more of my warrants. Moreover, being greatly incensed, he wrote a warrant with his own hand to the sheriff to disarm me." End of the account. Well, the proclamation issued by Maryland, Massachusetts, New York, Virginia, and other colonies sanctioned the arrest of Every, although their actions were often limited to this, just proclamations. As time passed, the colonial governors faced increasing risks in sheltering pirates. However, only 7 members of Every's crew were ever brought to trial between 1697 and 1705. And guess what? Every single one of them was found not guilty. And with that, we don't really know what happened to Henry Every. Perhaps just going and disappearing somewhere. Perhaps the ship sank and we never saw him again. Perhaps he just changed his name and blended into whatever society he ended up blending into. Either way, there's certainly a legacy that's worth talking about. The pirate who was never captured. The king of pirates. And so I must thank my top-tier patrons and members on YouTube. That is Doug, Kerry, Kimberly, Ember, Ben, Britt, Charles, Erin, James, Jeffrey, Melissa, Scott, Stark Factory, Wendy, Jaden, and Sherry. Thank you very much. And thank you. I am sure I will see you in the next video. Aren't you excited? I know I am. You can hear it in the tone of my voice. Good night, everyone. Lots of love to you all.